Episode 248 of the Bevan Eyles Show, an interview with Inga Gnatt on dealing with eating disorders. Rightio team, welcome along to episode 248 of the Bevan Eyles Show, your fortnightly podcast on the behaviours that create a lifetime love of exercise so you can get all the amazing benefits that come alongside it. Got a really good interview today, actually, a lady by the name of Inga Gnatt. She's a lady I've known through the fitness industry for a very long period of time. She was a very high-level dancer, achieved massive things in the fitness industry, and has gone on to study psychology and has put a particular interest in eating disorders. And a few months ago, I was in Melbourne. She lives in Melbourne, doing some work over there. And when I was there, we were just chatting, and she was just telling me what she was doing in her career, and I just absolutely loved it. And I actually messaged her when I got back from Australia, and I said, I'd love to get you on the show to talk about some of the work that you are doing. And so here we are today, and you're going to be listening to this interview really soon. It's a really cool interview, some really interesting insight. So it's on eating disorders. So if you are someone who has eating disorders, there might be something in there for you. I think eating disorders is a bit like, it kind of touches us all nowadays, if I'm going to be honest. Because now, I don't know your life, but I imagine most of us probably know somebody who we have some concerns around with eating disorders. It might be yourself, it might be a family member, it might just be somebody within your periphery of your life who you may think have some problems with this. And so it's a really important discussion, and by no means is the discussion I have with Inga today the answers to all things eating disorders, but she's got an approach which is an interesting approach. So yeah, I highly recommend. Well, it's a really awesome interview. So I'm not going to spend much time talking before the interview today. Just basically, we talked for like 50 minutes in the interview. So I'm going to pretty much get straight into it. Just a couple of little quick things. Thank you for those who have got my book already. If you haven't got my book, or you think you know somebody who get value out of my book, the book is called I Will Make You Passionate About Exercise. It's also, the website is passionaboutexercise.com. When you get the book, you get 12 free workouts, you get this goal setting workshop I've created. You also get the book, obviously, and it's a guide way to help you go from doing nothing to having a lifetime love of exercise. If you can get the book or recommend the book, that's really great. Also, I want to say a massive thank you to the patrons of the show. These are the people who basically donate to the show every time I release an episode of the show, and I really appreciate the support that the patrons give. And when you do become a patron, you get a cool Bevan Eyles Show nickname, and these are some of the people who have done that. We've got Mac Forest Warhol Ackhurst, we've got Holly the Go-Getter Woodhouse, we've got Sue The Only Way Up is Up Chisel, we've got Denise Ab Fab Dana, we've got Nathan, I don't know your last name, Nathan the Hurricane, and then we've got Marie Jane, the Magic Moriko. These are all people who support the podcast. If you want to become a patron, and I really do, if you listen to the show, the way I look at it, if you listen to the show and you get lots of value from the show, that's basically the cost of a magazine. So if you even chuck $1 my way, it really makes a difference. So yeah, there we go. And actually, I will just want to say one thing. So yeah, if you want to become a patron, go to bevanjameseyles.com, go through the patron page. It's all pretty obvious from there. I've been getting some amazing feedback on the challenge I put on the last podcast. And so if you're doing the 21-day challenge, keep it up. And if you are doing it, I'd love to hear some feedback on the other side of it. So once you've actually done the challenge, if you want to send me an email, just give me some feedback. I may even get someone on and interview them. So if you're doing my 21-day challenge and you're interested in me interviewing you about the process, maybe flick me an email once you've completed it and I'll maybe get you on to interview you. Anyway, here is the main gist of the show with Inga. Right, team, I'm very excited to have a lovely lady by the name of Inga Gnatt. Now, I had to ask her how to say that before we actually started speaking today, but so welcome along to the show.
Thank you very much.
So I suppose before we kind of, I was kind of motivated to get you on the show because I was in Melbourne about a month ago, and you were telling me about kind of the work you're doing with your study and your career, and I found it really fascinating. So I thought it'd be quite cool to have a chat about that on the show. But let's take a step back and maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself. And you've worked in fitness for a long time, so maybe just give us an introduction to Inga.
Sure. Well, hopefully this will be helpful for maybe some of your younger viewers who are wondering what to do with their life, because my experience of life has certainly been one that has shifted and changed throughout my kind of career, I guess you can call it that. And something that I always reflect on is the fact that even though it has been quite a diverse sort of range of roles and opportunities that have come my way, I've taken something from everything. So I left school after fifth form to pursue a career in classical ballet because that was just my absolute love and passion. And so I successfully auditioned for the New Zealand School of Dance, and I attended that school for a couple of years, but then shifted over to a different institution in Melbourne called the Victorian College of the Arts that was a little bit more suited to me as a person, and also my aspirations, which following quite a significant injury had shifted a little more towards contemporary dance. And from there, I did a bit of project work, which is the nature of contemporary dance, unfortunately, a lot of the time. And I'm so old that it was pre social media.
Yeah.
And so information was probably a little bit less easy to get. Even the internet wasn't very good then.
Mm.
And I do often think, geez, I wish I had had all of that information at my fingertips because I probably would have done a little bit more with those skills at that time. But then I floated around a few different roles, and one of those roles was actually I moved back to New Zealand for a couple of years. Sorry, that's my dog sneezing.
That's okay.
And I ended up working in Les Mills in Wellington in sales and really enjoyed it. So I worked there for a few years and then ended up back in Melbourne. And it was at that point that I really started to fall in love with fitness. So I'd enjoyed doing the classes before that, but then when I moved back to Melbourne, it was when I don't know, it was like there was like a switch that was flicked, and it was almost like I was able to use a lot of the skills that I'd developed through dance in just a really different way that probably had a bit less pressure and was a good challenge. It was because we know that it's a challenge, and it doesn't matter how long we've been doing it, we're always learning. And so that's how I kind of got into fitness, which I've been in since 2008 as an instructor, that is. And then sort of, I guess, my third career, which is in psychology, happened maybe around, I think I started studying it around about 10 years ago. It's quite a long journey, because I'd always been really curious, and I thought it would be something that I would be good at and that I'd enjoy. And
Mm.
again, sort of similar to fitness, that it would have longevity, and in that no human is the same. So you're never going to know everything, and you're always going to be learning. And that's something that I value a lot. And yeah, so that's when I started studying it. And I'm just a few months away from finishing a qualification that's a clinical PhD. So you do your clinical masters alongside a full PhD. And that's what I'm doing at the moment.
I've got a couple of questions about your history. So, leaving school at 15 to chase the dance dream, were your
Yeah.
parents supportive of that? Because it's a like it is kind of a one, and it's a very small percentage game, isn't it? Not many people actually get the opportunity to make a career out of dance. And was that a tough decision, or were you just kind of like all on board?
Oh, I just did not doubt it for a second.
Okay.
And I I mean, I would say I didn't give them any choice, but of course, when you're that age, I mean, you kind of can't do anything without the
Yeah,
support of your parents,
yeah.
because they, for a start, are supporting you emotionally, physically, and financially. So I
Mm,
couldn't have done it without them. And I was really lucky that I come from a family where hard work is really valued, and there's the belief that's instilled in us around, if you have something that you want to try, then you should.
mm.
And so I was really, really fortunate
How
in
much
that.
maturity did you have to gain? Because, I met, 15, you're pretty young, let's be honest. And,
Oh, I know.
and then going into a world where I imagine you're with adults pretty much from day one. What was it like? And also a competitive, really high
Oh,
pressure world as well.
yeah, there's a lot of layers to that. Obviously, I've unpacked a lot of them as I've trained as a psychologist as well. I've been able to reflect on that. And the first thing I probably would say is that I look back on my younger self um, with I just think, oh my gosh, like you're adorable. I can't believe you thought that you could just do whatever you wanted. Whereas now I carefully consider every single choice and decision I make. Whereas back then I was like, I'm gonna do this now. So yeah, I think it's a big deal, and I've kind of gone off on a tangent. Can you please
Well,
ask
just,
that question
like,
again?
how did it make you grow up? Because again, you go
Hmm,
from being a kid basically into a high pressure,
hmm.
I imagine very competitive, and I imagine there's aspects of it that aren't healthy. What was that kind of growth experience like for you, and how did you manage it?
Yeah. Um, so it probably started before that because, uh, funnily enough, a few years prior, my stepdad, who's quite into sports, had engaged with a sports psychologist
Oh wow.
because my parents thought, geez, this is a lot for like a 13-year-old to be dealing with.
Yeah.
Um, Having big goals and aspirations, but also having to put up with and try and deal gracefully with losing,
Mm,
and losing when things really mean a lot to you,
mm,
dealing with setbacks and knockbacks and injuries and disappointments, because those are things that are part of the world of certainly ballet and dance, to a large degree as well. So I think that I was really mature in a lot of ways, and then probably quite immature in a lot of ways too, because from such a young age, I remember deciding when I was 9. I remember the exact moment that I decided that this was going to be exactly what I was going to do for the rest of my life. I was at an audition in Christchurch, actually. We were living in Christchurch, and I attended this audition, and again, it was maybe a little similar to that switch going off in group fitness. It was like all of a sudden I kind of got it, and I stood in the posture of a ballet dancer, and I
mm,
held my head like a ballet dancer, and I could understand the expression and that type of thing. It was this quite strange experience, and yeah, so I had decided really young, but what that also meant is that I didn't go out drinking and I didn't party, and I was really driven at school, and I did really well at school, even though I left so early. I
mm,
did do well, and so I didn't. And there's probably good and bad things to both, right? I didn't have maybe make some of the normal mistakes that a teenager would usually make. And because I think that some of those mistakes are actually really valuable if
mm.
you can do it in an environment where you're supported, and and it's not too significant, and you're able to kind of pull yourself back from it.
So in some ways,
Yeah.
while you're kind of streaming ahead, there were some kind of missed opportunities and where you could have learned life other in other ways.
Yeah. And I've developed that since.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
you're now a party
Maybe
animal.
just in a
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, as I go to bed at
Well, here's another
9:30
question for
p.m.
you. So then you kind of go on, and obviously it didn't last, A, it's a tough game, and B, it's a body game, so there's always limits around those things. And then you decide you're going to study what, probably late 20s, something around there. And what was it like to go to study? Was it a scary moment? Like, obviously you had been a successful up till the age of 15 at school, but what was that like for you?
Hmm. Ah, that's a great question. What happened was, um, and I know that it's a little bit different in New Zealand, but in Australia, if you already have any degree, there's often a pathway into another profession that you can do by enrolling in something called a grad dip, which is basically all of the undergraduate courses that you would generally do, for example, in psychology. You can do it as a grad dip, so you don't have to do the whole
Yep.
broad degree again. So I enrolled in one of those. And honestly, at the start, I was not very good.
Oh, really?
I didn't, I d- like I was average at best.
Yeah.
I would have been average at best in terms of my grades and that type of thing. But what I did is I've just worked really, really hard.
Okay.
And I was really lucky that I made some good friendships quickly. And those friendships were with people that were both really intelligent and really generous. And what that enabled me to do was to accelerate my learning. And I could almost feel my brain opening up as we progressed. So I
Mm.
took 2 years to do that part time, and by the end of it, I was getting good grades because, unfortunately, in psychology, that it's so competitive, and there's so many people that are interested in doing it that you really have to get achieve pretty high marks in
Mm.
order to be able to keep going. Mm.
Can I ask, because I imagine in that moment when you first start studying and you're not killing it, and because obviously your character traits mean that you often experience success in life. How was that hard? And it sounds like you went back to your character traits to get through it. But ego-wise, what was that moment like?
Yeah, I did definitely have moments where I was very self-critical. Um, But I think what I've learned to do with that sort of thing is to use it. I'll temporarily allow myself to have those thoughts like, oh, see, you suck. But
Mm.
then I'll be like, but what are you going to do about it? What do
Mm.
you, how can you, who do you know that could maybe can give you a hand with how to understand this?
Mm.
Um, and because I really believed in myself to be able to do this as a job. And I just knew that I just needed to tick those boxes and be good enough, because then by the time it gets to kind of getting into the post grad courses, marks are important, experience is important, and your personality and the way that you conduct yourself is also considered important. And
Mm.
I knew I'd smash that part.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Because I'm absolutely suitable. I am the right person for that job.
Mm.
But
It's
then
interesting,
so
isn't
are a
it? But
lot of
I like what you're
people.
saying because, like, unfortunately for a lot of people, when they have that kind of they hit the wall or they're doubtful or full of insecurity, and we all experience it. But for a lot of people, it's a debilitating moment. And ultimately, what you're saying is that even
Mm,
when you experience it, you knew just move towards action. If I can move towards action, there'll be progress, and that gives me the best chance of success. Not bugger this and quit or lack it, pull back on effort, which means there's less chance of success.
no, absolutely not. I was working a full time job. I was teaching around about 5 or 6 group fitness classes a week, working as a trainer and presenter for Les Mills. And so what it meant there was that there were lots of late nights.
Yeah,
And I just stayed up until it was done.
yeah.
And I didn't complain because it was such a great opportunity. And I needed to work to support myself while I was doing it. And I completely accept that.
Mm, mm.
I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves that even though it is hard, and imagine how many people around the world just couldn't even have this opportunity. So we
Yeah.
can't waste it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good attitude. Okay, so let's dig a little bit deep into what we were talking about when we were in Melbourne. So you and I were just kind of presenting at a
Hmm,
workshop with a big Les Mills thing, and you kind of just telling me about some of the stuff you're doing with eating disorders and some of the group work you did. And so maybe just tell us where that starts from and kind of where just kind of talk about it because I was fascinated by it.
sure. So when I was in my first year of my PhD, did spend a large proportion of that year trying to work out what can I actually research. And for me, I wanted it to be something that was as meaningful as it could be within the constraints of a short project because it's a pretty short period of time and
Yeah.
there's lots of other things that you're doing. And so lots of reading, lots of discussions with my supervisors. And what we landed on was that eating disorders are a pretty big problem for a lot of people, and even disordered eating. So I might just go back one step. There's a couple of classification systems that we use in medical or sort of psychological professions, and they classify different mental disorders like we would classify diabetes, for example. But we also understand that most things occur along a continuum. And so we might slide up and down. Even if we think about our own experiences of mood, we have days where we feel on top of the world, and then we have other days where we don't. And that's really normal. So you could imagine you're sort of sliding up and down that continuum a little bit. And when we think of someone being maybe unwell, it would be where you've kind of got to a point where it's actually really impacting on that person's life. And if we think about that in terms of eating disorders, there's a set criteria that someone might meet for one of the known eating disorders or the subclinical eating disorders. But then within that, there's other people that don't meet any of it where it could actually impact on their life. So we would call that disordered eating. So I'm really talking about both of those.
Okay.
And the problem is that with eating disorders, the current treatments only elicit around about a 50% recovery rate.
Oh, wow.
So that means that out of the very small proportion of people who access treatment, and the average duration of illness prior to even engaging in treatment is 5 years.
Wow.
That person's been suffering for 5 years before something happens where they then engage in treatment.
Can I just ask,
Yeah.
do you know how much, and this might be hard to answer, but as a percentage of society, how many people have eating disorders?
Oh, yeah, it's really hard.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I don't know. Probably lots.
Lots more than we think, I
Because
imagine.
it's so underreported, and it would be really underreported in men as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, yeah.
Wouldn't it?
Okay, sorry, but keep going. I was just kind of curious.
Heaps.
Yeah.
Maybe 1%, but maybe I'd say a lot more than that.
Yeah.
And I've worked with people that describe what they're going through, and I'm like, well, that's you're meeting the criteria for an eating disorder. Am I? Oh, that's just how I've always been. Yes, if we can do something about this, this is okay.
Yeah.
Is this what you're experiencing? Yep. Okay, we know what this is.
Okay.
So even though I'm saying that people occur along a continuum, the good thing about having names for things is that then there's a shared understanding. So if I speak to a GP or a psychiatrist and we've got this label, I guess it is, then there's acknowledgement that we know what each other are talking about.
Yeah.
So that's where it's quite helpful.
So taking you back, so 50% of the people who get treatment, which is pretty minor anyway, don't actually get an outcome.
Yeah. No.
Wow.
Yeah. So what will often happen is that, say if it's severe enough that someone enters hospital or inpatient treatment, at the end of it, that they may have, say, gained enough weight to be medically stabilized, and they're not engaging in a particular number of behaviors and that kind of thing. But what the qualitative research tells us is that although that might be the case, for the people that relapse, often they feel as though there's underlying things that are happening for them that haven't been addressed. And so what that brought us to was that for a significant portion of people with eating disorders, they have previously experienced trauma and then also trauma-related symptoms. And that could be as bad as having post-traumatic stress disorder, which is PTSD. And again, there's lots and lots of people who terrible things happen to, and they may be able to process that within a period of time and actually recover. And so they don't get PTSD, but then for some people they do. So that can mean that they have symptoms like re-experiencing what has happened, avoiding certain things that might remind them of that incident or incidents, and that there's this overwhelming sense of threat. So if we take those two things together, we know that we need to improve eating disorder treatments. And something that's been happening in the medical world is much more personalized medicine. So that means that medicine is created for that person, for their genes, and that's about as far as my knowledge goes. I don't want to go into it too much, but that's the gist of it. And so we thought, well, we know there's this large subset of people who have this comorbidity, and then there's some shared psychological factors that probably are difficult for both of these disorders, and maybe worse when they occur together, which are things like having trouble with regulating emotions, understanding emotions. Emotions can feel really threatening and overwhelming. They have experienced high levels of shame. And what that can mean is that shame can then elevate their own sense of self. So they can have quite a negative self-concept. And you can imagine that if those things are going on and someone's giving them this logical treatment, which is like, okay, when this feeling happens, try and resist it. But underneath that, you've got this sense of self where you're like, well, this is probably my fault and I deserve it. Well, then it's really hard to get a lot of traction.
Yeah.
Shall I keep going?
No, keep going. I love it. Keep going. Yeah.
The punchline.
Yeah.
So then what we came across was a treatment modality which was created by Professor Paul Gilbert in the UK, and it's a compassion-based intervention. So it's called compassion-focused therapy, and it's basically a skills training, which is known as compassionate mind training. And what it does is that it teaches a series of activities and exercises to elicit different parts of ourselves, like our parasympathetic nervous system, by regulating and slowing down our breath, changing the expression on our face and the vocal tone that we talk to ourselves with, because that can also trigger off physiological responses in our bodies, and help us to respond in a more compassionate way. And compassion involves action and engagement. So being able to engage with things that are difficult in life and then take the necessary steps to be able to alleviate that challenge or those difficulties and move through. It's not about just being like really fluffy and nice. It's like, no, life is really hard. And sometimes we've got to find a way to move through that struggle in a more helpful way that doesn't harm us and doesn't harm others.
And so I seem to recall you said you also do it in like a group environment, the training kind of system. So talk about that.
Yeah. So what we did was I went off and did the training in Sydney, and then I did some more training up in Germany with Paul. And what we delivered is some group sessions for people that identify as having both trauma and sort of PTSD symptoms, as well as an eating disorder. And we designed a 10-week program, 2 hours per week, where we taught the psychoeducation around how our brains are quite tricky and we can get stuck in these loops. Then developing the compassionate part of ourselves, which is compassion to ourselves, towards others, and then being able to accept it from others, which is often the hardest one.
Oh, really?
And then we unpack. Yeah.
Can you give an example? Can you give an example of that?
Yeah. So imagine if really deep down you didn't feel like you deserved it, and someone was really compassionate towards you. Imagine how hard that would feel.
Yep.
It almost feels disgusting.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. So you reject it anyway.
It's a really, really normal. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Such a normal response.
And it's quite a common response in people in these situations.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But often what we can, and it can be, it doesn't have to be, but it could be that their caregivers early in life didn't react to them in that way. And that can be quite a challenge in terms of things like our attachment system and being able to feel safe and secure.
Mm.
But we can always improve it. We can always start to generate those feelings and sensations for ourselves, even if it's not something that was given to us.
So
So,
it's training it as a conscious process so that eventually it
mm,
becomes something that is more installed in you as a person.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And I've worked with some people that are highly skeptical, and fair enough, because how could you not be?
Mm.
It's a really different way of working on these difficulties. But quite often there'll be something or someone in their life where they know exactly what it is. It could be towards your dog or towards your child, or it could have been that there was a neighbor that lived next door to you when you were growing up, or a grandparent, or a teacher even, that has shown you this. And so innately we know what it is. It's just that sometimes maybe it's gone a little bit offline, and we need to tap back into it and work on it and strengthen it like a muscle.
Mm.
Yeah.
And
And
like,
I've found,
oh, sorry, you go. You
mm,
keep going. There you go.
yeah, well, I found that often people will participate in the groups, and then all of a sudden they'll get there on one of the weeks, like week 5 or week 6, and all of a sudden this compassionate part of them has come online.
Oh,
So they
wow.
might have endured something, I don't know, like road rage, or someone at the supermarket cutting them off or doing something. And whereas usually that would trigger a whole lot of rage in them, they found that they were able to tap into that more compassionate response.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
And what kind of techniques are you teaching them? You know, like obviously it's about compassion, but give us an example of a technique that you would teach them. Obviously, because you're kind of saying there's kind of a double tier approach. We need to educate them on what's happening and the background of it all. And then obviously there's
Mm.
probably teaching them the awareness of when it's happening. I imagine it's a big part of it. So teaching them, would that be right?
Yeah, definitely. So mindfulness is one of the things that comes in fairly early on, and that can be a real struggle for people, particularly who have experienced trauma, because sitting with their body and their breath and really
Yeah.
focusing internally can be something that is not comfortable. So there's other ways that we can bring maybe a bit of more of an external focus. Like a simple one would be that they can maybe do some colouring in, or hold on to some squishy balls and imagine that their breath is flowing out to those squishy balls as opposed
Mm.
to into their bodies. Um, but then what that reminds us is that we all have that capacity of being able to shift where our attention goes. That's really what mindfulness is, isn't it? It's
Mm.
about shifting
Mm.
our attention.
Yeah.
And then in compassion focused therapy, and you can easily Google this, and you can actually do the whole exercise with Paul Gilbert online, um, is something called soothing rhythm breathing. And within that, we set the posture so that when we're sitting upright, it triggers a much different feel in our body,
So
as opposed
it's
to maybe
determining your
hunching
emotional
forwards.
state. It's basically creating an
It
emotional state.
does.
Okay. 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 Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we do that, and then we slow down our breath, and then, like I said before, we almost bring like a little bit of a smile to our face, and then as well as that, we will almost invite ourselves into that practice with our own voice in our own head. And I'm not going to give you an example
It's all right.
because it's embarrassing. And I save that only for the people in the groups.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So we do that, and then we start to practice that each week. So
Okay.
there's a combination of different things that happens, and it's based in all the different types of research that Paul's used. Um, and then even the cueing. So there's some cueing that we use within that, and that's mind slowing down and body slowing down, which is not something we do all that often.
Mm,
We don't
mm.
slow down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it's hard, especially people like us. We're pretty go, 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 right?
Yeah, for sure.
Mm, yeah. And then from there, we start to build what that compassionate image is, as well as having a safe place that we can go to in our mind. So there's a lot of use of imagination.
Sounds like it,
And
yeah.
I don't know, yeah, I don't know if that's something that you've used in fitness, but I use a lot of visualization in group fitness.
Same, yeah, no, I get it,
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's that same thing. Like the power of our mind is quite unbelievable, and sometimes we can imagine something before and then make it real.
Yep.
So if we imagine it, it's not quite so hard to tolerate.
No, I'm a big believer in it. I'm a big believer in even like it's the way I live my day is I see my day before I live it and see the moments that I have to confront which are challenging and
Yeah.
try to win the moment before I experience the moment. You know, like that's kind of what you're doing really with visualization or any technique like that. It's kind of foreseeing the future and seeing the bits that are going to be a struggle. And the thing is, you can often see them. You know what I mean? Like especially if you are living a kind of regular day, you
Mm.
can often see the bits that are going to be confronting for you. And so it is that kind of okay. Well, how do I go into that bit with the best chance of success? Is kind of and obviously I'm just doing it more at a practical sense of being a higher self. But you're obviously using it with these people and moments where you could be vulnerable. How you're going to deal with it in a way that's actually more compassionate, which will help you moving forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And because then in the middle of I think week 6 and 7, we really start to work on our emotions. So we might think of a difficult situation, and then we work through some of the base emotions that most of us experience, which are anger, anxiety, sadness. And then we move into how would our compassionate self respond to this. So
Nice.
we'll think about we'll and we share this as a group. You were asking before about, well, why do you do it as a group? There's a couple of reasons. Number one, it's less cost,
Yep.
but actually, I'd say that the main benefit is that sitting in a room with people that get you and you don't have to explain yourself to is really nice. And
Mm.
there's this shared understanding, hey, we've all been through some stuff. And we don't ever talk about that. We don't say, okay, tell us your life story in front
Yeah.
of everyone. It's a skills based thing. Um, yeah, so but once we've built that trust and rapport between the group members, they're able to support one another um, and help to share their own experiences in a way that's appropriate and safe. And this the when we talk about the emotions, it's really where everyone realizes that these things that I've been experiencing and feeling and struggling with, actually everyone else is too.
Mm.
So how does it show up for us? How does it feel in our body? Where do we feel it? What does that feel like? What do we notice in our mind? What does that angry part of us want to do to the other person, to the situation? What does it want for us? What's it trying to protect us from?
Mm.
And the stance is, and I think this is just such a great thing to think about, is that all of these emotions are actually really helpful because they're telling us something about the situation.
Mm.
And then at the end of that, we think about, okay, well, when we get really angry and it feels really out of control, what are some of the ways that we know that we can start to tone that down and regulate the way that we're feeling? And what that allows people to do is to recognize that emotion better. So when it comes out, you can, instead of feeling just totally overwhelmed, totally shut down, out of control, whatever it might be, that's anger. It's come here and it's trying to help me to navigate this situation. And okay, that thank you for being here,
Yeah.
anger. That's awesome. That is really great. It's a bit overwhelming right now, and I know that if I just slow myself down and I go somewhere where I feel safe, or I breathe and I label it, whatever it might be, there's lots of different ways that people may cope with that. Is it actually, it becomes not so scary. And it's not an instant thing, but it is definitely something that I've found everybody is able to connect with.
Well, I think the other thing about that group dynamic as well is one thing I find, I love working with groups as well. And exercise, obviously, but even when you're trying to do kind of self-development stuff, and because there's also process in listening to other people, and as you're kind of saying,
Yes.
like you're processing yourself, even if someone's talking about their experience, you are going through your own processing in there as well. And if you are creating quite a safe environment where people can freely express, then you are getting to that deeper level, which helps people to process to a deeper level as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because that is actually one of the most important parts of compassion focused therapy. Each week we'll go with a structure to the session, but at any point along the way, if the group needs longer or needs to some more time in one of the portions of that session, well, then we take it. And for that exact reason. And I've found we've run 7 groups, and each one of them is completely different. Depends on the people in the group, what's happening for them. Yeah. So that processing, and once that trust has been built and people are able to share their ideas and thoughts and support with one another, then that's where the real magic happens. And it's actually not from us as facilitators, it's definitely the people in the group who create that.
So how long is it? Did you say it's an 8-week program?
10.
Okay, so they work through this 10-week process. They're kind of flexing the muscle of developing this kind of process of working through this in a healthier way, and learning the trigger moments earlier, how to deal with the trigger moments. So for that reason, they then don't go to the place of the bad eating habits or the bad eating behaviors, or if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So what we're really trying to target in the group, well, number one, build a greater sense of compassion, so that when difficult things happen, there's a more adaptive way of coping that's helpful to them. But then alongside that, greater compassion is associated with less shame and self-criticism.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
yeah, so that's actually what we're really targeting within this treatment modality. So we don't, we'll occasionally, I might say, hey, this is something that's come up that I've heard people that have eating disorders and PTSD talk about. How does that resonate with you? And then the discussion might go on from there. But other than that, we're not saying you need to eat at this time and you need to eat this and that and stop doing this and thinking that. It's actually what we're really hoping for is that through this process of developing a greater sense of compassion, which of course 10 weeks is just the beginning, but
Yeah,
we
of
do
course.
find that people really do start to develop it, that they will understand deeply that whatever it is that's happened, it's absolutely not their fault, but it is their responsibility to keep working on it. And that's, of course, if you have the capacity to be able to do that, and that, yeah. So we're not even really, we work alongside their treating teams, which may be their GP, psychiatrist, psychologist, and they'd still be receiving individual support for whatever it is that they're working on at that time, whether it's the trauma or eating disorder or both. And then we're trying to help develop these skills that will help to successfully set them up long term, so that there's some patterns that have changed, and that they're able to, I don't know, just
Manage life.
not be so bogged down, with these things that are going on. And a lot of the people that we're working with are very high functioning people. If you looked at them, you wouldn't be like, oh, you've got all this really hard stuff going on. You would not know that.
Yeah, no, it's often the case, isn't it? So, I don't
Yeah.
know if you guys have been doing it long enough to know, if we look at the model that you talked about earlier, where not many people actually get treatment, and of those, only 50% are, long-term success. Have you guys been doing this long enough to see if it's a better way forward?
the way that I'd probably comment on that is that it's it can be a piece of the puzzle for some people that if it comes at the right time can be really helpful.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, it's not, I wouldn't say, hey, we all just need to do this from now on because this
Yeah,
is the perfect fix. It's kind of like if it comes at the right time where that person is ready and committed and feels motivated enough to embed this within their life and they've had enough support and have ongoing support around their eating disorder or their trauma symptoms, then it can be really helpful.
yeah, nice. That's really good about it.
Yeah.
I do have a couple of questions which are kind of on topic but different topic. Um, you know, eating disorders seem to be more prevalent now, and maybe it's social media. I can't really put my finger on it. I don't know the answers, but it definitely seems to be more
Mm.
of a problem. Um, First of all, for those who are around the people, so let's say you've got a daughter,
Mm-hmm.
or you've got someone in your life who you know is having problems. What's the best way to address it? Because it's such a like I know as a fitness professional, I know there's people in my world who have eating disorders. I never really
Mm.
bring it up. Like if they talk to me, like I've had some people who
No.
trust me a lot, and they may bring stuff up with me, and that's cool, and I'll try to support them and guide them towards the right people at least. But you know, is it my role to say something? Like it's such a delicate thing. And
Yeah, what do you
and
do?
as a fitness instructor, like let's say I'm a fitness instructor at the gym, it's probably not really my role. It's a tough one. But for the people in the world who do have people around them who they know that what is like, and I know there's not a perfect answer for this, but what would be your advice?
So the first thing to know is that eating disorders are caused by a number of things. So we we know that there's the biological basis, which means that you might have some genes that make you a little more prone to developing uh, difficulties in this area. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean you will, but you might. And so obviously that's not your fault.
No.
Um, and then you might have some psychological factors like being a perfectionist or being like really driven. Those types of things might mean that you're a little bit more susceptible because when you do something, you do it really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You're really committed.
Yeah, it's like I'm the most
Yeah,
disciplined, and not eating is a disciplined thing. So it's kind of reinforcing a character trait.
yeah, it
Yeah,
is. Yeah.
yeah,
There might be something around um, sort of aspects of your social environment, whether it's at school or a particular sport. I know there's a lot of pressure on people like runners to
mm,
look a particular way that's actually not necessarily got anything to do with how well they can run.
mm.
Um, Fortunately, those problematic um, thoughts are starting to shift. There's
Well,
enough
and
people
I'm sure
working
you
in the
saw it
area.
in dance. Like in dance, I imagine there was a bit of that back in the day.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, like there's a sort of more athletic aesthetic that is becoming more popular,
Mm,
which is a really positive shift. So, but I think that it's still a pretty challenging
mm.
area with dance. I think I do find that with dancers, they may be fairly restrictive when they're dancing in terms of their food and stuff, but not that many people would typically sort of go on for it to be a lifelong thing, or
Okay.
and when they stop, they'll kind of be able to sort of move through it.
Yeah.
But it can be, yeah. I mean, I've heard some pretty harsh horror stories. But I've recently worked actually with the Australian Ballet School and found that they are, yeah, I mean, the director there and is just amazing and really embraces individuality with the dancers, which I think it's just a massive shift forwards from what my perception of it was 20 years ago when I was still dancing. So
Mm.
I think it is absolutely moving in the right direction. So yeah, knowing that it's a number of things that can lead to someone having these difficulties. Um, so find some online resources I'm in Victoria in Australia, and there's a wonderful organisation here called Eating Disorders Victoria, and they've got some great info on their websites. I'm sure there's an equivalent in New
Mm.
Zealand or wherever it is that people are tuning in from. But some of the things that I always think of is to try and educate yourself and think about the fact that that person is probably experiencing things like a really high level of anxiety
Mm.
around this,
Mm. Oh, it's funny you say that
shame.
because when I was younger, my I would stutter if I was insecure. And when I was a druggie, it actually became a big problem. Like I just stutter all the time. And then when I
Mm.
gave up drugs, it was never a problem. And then I actually had a really bad experience with Les Mills. I went to America for like 3 or 4 months, and it was a really horrible experience. Like everything about it sucked. And I remember I started
Oh,
stuttering again. It was really fascinating. And I remember I was just hope nobody noticed it. Like all I cared about was. And I remember when someone said to me, "If you stutter a lot, don't you?"
ah,
And when someone said it, it just hurt. Like it was just like knife through the heart kind of stuff. Yeah, and it was really fascinating. Yeah,
oh,
because I was struggling so much within myself with it anyway, but you're kind of just
oh,
hoping no one notices. And then once someone else acknowledged it, it was even worse. It was like, it was
oh
really tough.
man.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of myths around eating disorders. Um, when I've worked with families, it's always, it breaks my heart when I see parents that are blaming themselves,
Mm,
and just even having that conversation to let them know, hey, this is just, there's a whole lot of things that are at play here, and it
mm,
is no one's fault, and
mm.
it really sucks, and it's really hard,
Yeah.
and I'm so sorry that you're going through this, but let's just do what we can to help
Yeah.
you and your family and this young person who's struggling so much. So shame, embarrassment, guilt. Um, a lot of people with eating disorders may not even recognize, or may be kind of in denial that it's a problem.
Mm,
So knowing that too.
yeah.
Some of the recommendations that we give to people are using I statements. So I really care about you and I'm really worried
Okay.
because I've noticed this and this. And just letting them know that you're a safe person that they can talk to, but also not feeling like you've got to solve it yourself, because you don't.
Mm,
Um, Even though I do this for a job, it, if I noticed that a friend of mine was struggling, then I would be pointing them in the direction of help for them, and I'd support them as a friend, not as
mm,
anything else. And then trying to understand how they feel, and allowing them the time, and just strongly encouraging them to seek help, and that you can support them along the way in a way that is appropriate and okay, that feels okay for you,
yeah.
depending on what your relationship is with that person.
Yeah. So
But
be supportive,
the
but supportive towards the right kind of help.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I always think having a great GP is absolutely paramount to recovery, because they are in that privileged position where they can, they're such great communicators, and they also understand sort of the psychological and the medical side,
Mm,
and that can be really important.
mm,
And then I forgot to mention one of the main reasons why I I love about working in eating disorders is that you can absolutely recover.
yeah. Nice. Yeah.
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 So it's like, this could be a terrible, terrible problem, and by no means is it easy. And lots of people don't necessarily want to work in this area, but I do. And because I firmly believe that you can definitely overcome it.
Yeah.
It's
Which
it's
is
just
really important,
finding the
isn't it?
help
Because
that
that
works
sense
for
of
you.
hope's really important, isn't it? Like, um,
Hmm.
it's tough when there are areas where you can't actually, like you just have to accept that this is going to suck. Whereas if there is an area like you're saying that if with work and guidance and like a progression forward, you can actually get to a better place.
Yeah, and that's how we feel about kind of any kind of psychological difficulty that someone's enduring. I think we hear a lot about what's a problem, and maybe not so much about that, the focus on recovery.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's right. We can hear the dog in the background. We can hardly actually hear it, so it's all good.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
She must have heard a leaf move. Oh, she's back in bed.
She's back in bed. Just
Yeah.
anything else you want to say as we wrap things up here? Anything else you kind of want to comment on, or anything else you want to share?
Well, maybe around and I don't think this is it. I find that, and I might be wrong, but I do find that the gyms in New Zealand and probably encourage a little bit more body diversity, whereas I don't see much of it in the classes where I teach. Maybe it's just where I'm teaching, but it would be I think that it would be really great, and maybe you see this more in your business that you run with Joe, is it would be really great if we could find a way of just inviting more inclusivity into our into fitness so that more people feel welcome and included, because it doesn't matter where you're starting from, and then also thinking about the fact that we've actually all got really different goals, and it doesn't have to be about how you look.
Yeah,
My
totally
goals
not.
are not about how I look.
Well, it's really interesting because I speak to a lot of people who aren't exercisers and struggle with exercise, and the image really never comes up as their first answer. You know, like it's more about being able to live a life they want to live, you know, to have experiences, you know, like it's, you know, it's more about having energy, you know, sure, some of them want to lose some weight, but it's pretty often like the fourth or fifth answer.
Yeah, because how confident and awesome and how much do you bounce out of bed in the morning when you're feeling strong and healthy and you're just in that flow.
Yeah.
And I think that I really want that for other people, and theirs might not look the same as mine, but I just know how much better, and probably from going through the pandemic where we were kind of shut indoors for a long time, um, and didn't have that, even just the incidental exercise. In Melbourne, we're only allowed outside for an hour a day.
And you guys were locked down forever, weren't you? Yeah, it was.
Yeah. I was lucky because I was roaming around the hospital wards and actually getting to talk to people. That was a massive privilege. But I did also see the toll that it took on people that happened to land themselves in hospital for one reason or another, and then not be able to have their family in there. That was terrible.
Yeah, horrific.
Yeah, so I don't know. It would be fabulous if we could just do everything that we can to be helpful to the people around us. Mind you, how much information is there out there bombarding people?
Yeah.
No wonder no one knows what to do.
Yeah, it's
probably like the whole mental health thing. Yeah, trust your own inner wisdom. You know what feels good for you. Yeah. I've worked with people who have told me they want to become more fit, so then they'll set themselves a goal around running, and week after week they're like, I'm like, oh, how did you go with your run? Oh, I didn't go. Oh, okay. And then after a while I'm like, do you like running? And then they'll go, no, I hate it. I'm like, why do we have a goal about running then?
Well, this is what I talk about in my book, because the second chapter is find a movement you love. Because you find a movement you love, you know, it's you know, like that's what it's all about. You know, it's like really we've got to get a bit of habit in place, but then once we find the movement, it's so much easier. You know, and the good thing about this is a million different movements. You know, who knows what you're like unless you try some stuff. You know, and so it's really interesting. Hey, where do people follow you? Do you care about all that kind of stuff? Like if you want people to follow you, where do they go?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram. It's Inga Gnatt. Good luck spelling it.
Well, it'll be in the title of the show. I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Yep. And I do have my own website, which is ingagnatt.com. Okay. And then I would recommend compassionatemind.co.uk, which is Paul Gilbert's website. There's lots of info on there. If anyone's interested in learning a little bit more about compassion-focused therapy or the philosophies behind it, then go for gold.
Compassionatemind.co.nz UK. I'll put that in the show notes as well. Hey, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really insightful, some really good knowledge here. And so there you go. As I was saying before the interview, some really insightful stuff there, some really interesting stuff. And I'll put links to both Inga's website on there and that Compassionate website on the show notes. That will be, if you're listening on your listening device right now, if you just go to the show notes right now, you can actually just click on it and there'll be a link in there. Or you can go to my website, which is bevanjameseyles.com. I've got a really cool concept for the next episode, so make sure you listen up for the next episode, because I've been working with a client recently. I've worked for a long time and it's made massive progress, but recently we've kind of found a tool that's helped them go to the next level, and there's been some really cool learnings in there, some really powerful stuff. So in the next episode, I'm going to kind of put that in place and I'm going to teach it to you, and I might even do another challenge. I'm liking these challenge things, this kind of 21-day challenge. I might give you a 10-day challenge, the Bevan challenges. I could have lots of different challenges for you. So if you look out for that. Couple of little quick things. If you enjoy the show, please go on your podcatcher and do a review. If you want to become a patron, go to bevanjameseyles.com. You then go to podcasts, support the show, go through the process. If you want to get some of my other work, it's my 5K running program, my 5K dream, or my new book, I Will Make You Passionate About Exercise. You can go to passionateaboutexercise.com or just go to my website. You can also get it there. Thank you for your support. Thanks. Keep doing what you're doing. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. So as always, keep being you.